My name is Bob Johnson. This is a story from nearly 30 years ago. It was a cold night in late November, about a month after I was sent to a factory in a rural town in Nebraska. Though it was just past 6 o'clock, it was already dark outside. Back then, I lived on the second floor of an apartment that the auto repair company I worked for had rented. After finishing work that day, I hurried home, holding the takeout I had bought for dinner. When I turned off the main street and into a narrow lane, my apartment was just ahead. There was a restaurant at the corner, but it was located deep inside a narrow pathway that extended from the main street. The land was shaped like a flagpole. It's called a flag lot. So, the restaurant building itself was diagonally across from my apartment, separated by that lane. The lane was dark with only a few street lights, but the light shining out of the restaurant's large windows was almost blinding. Sorry for the long preamble, but in essence, that evening, as I turned the corner from the main street and passed by a restaurant, I happened to glance over and saw a young woman in her 20s inside the restaurant, puckering her lips and sticking them out toward the window, as if she was beckoning for a kiss from me. I felt like I'd seen something I shouldn't have and hurriedly ascended the external staircase to my apartment. Originally, the reason I had been transferred to a factory in Nebraska was due to a light-hearted prank by a colleague with whom I had worked in a repair shop in New York. I was on the brink of turning 30. Around that time, the car repair shop where I'd worked for nearly 10 years went bankrupt, and I got re-employed as a mechanic at a car repair company with several branches in the Northeast. Of course, the workshop I joined had senior colleagues. But there were also mischievous junior colleagues. "Hey Bob, can you take care of this? Finish up what you're working on first." The task the junior colleague handed over to me was a simple regular inspection of a passenger car. However, the owner of this car, a customer, was quite a character. He was the heir to a transportation company that was a major client of our shop, and he would bring his car in for a regular checkup every 6 months. But if his car wasn't given top priority, he'd get in a foul mood. To make matters worse, he would secretly check to make sure his car wasn't being neglected. Unaware of this, I, following the junior colleague's instruction, first finished repairing another customer's car. Seeing his car's inspection being postponed, the heir, who had been watching from the shadows, lodged a complaint with the factory manager. "Did you guys properly explain it to Bob? We told him it's top priority." The junior colleague chuckled. The factory manager seemed to understand that I hadn't been properly informed. But the heir threatened to get his father involved and end all business with us unless I was fired. "Bob, given the situation, I hate to ask this, but could you go to our Nebraska branch until things cool down?" Not wanting to lose another job, I agreed to go to Nebraska. The factory manager said I'd be there until things cooled down, which meant for a year. In other words, it was a promise to bring me back to New York after a year. However, once I arrived at the rural Nebraska workshop, I quickly took a liking to the relaxed pace, quite different from New York. Throughout the workday, the local AM radio would play. Casually listening to the radio while working. From 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays, there was a laid-back program called Hello Nebraska that didn't seem special at all. But I got hooked on it. Every Wednesday, a female reporter on her rounds and the main male announcer would engage in banter that tickled my funny bone. "Hey, Catherine, where are you reporting from today?" "Hi, it's reporter Catherine. Today, I'm at the SC visiting the Arnota Park." "Wait, what? SC, what's that?" "That means the southern part of the county." "Well, then say South County properly." I thought I did. "Geez, you didn't. So, where's this Arnota Park? Sounds nice, I guess." "Yes, I'm definitely at the Arnota Park." "Why do you stretch out the E? It's in a daw." The male radio host would become particularly sharp-tinged, almost bursting with sarcasm, only when he interacted with her. It wasn't that he was genuinely mad. He seemed to be holding back laughter. And Catherine, the budding reporter, would earnestly and seriously respond, which for some reason I found hilarious and became addicted to. Anyway, about the girl from the restaurant across from my apartment. It soon became clear that she wasn't trying to beckon for a kiss from a passing stranger like me. Because, ever since that day, out of curiosity, I'd occasionally lean out from my apartment window to observe her. From my observations, I realized that she seemed to be a restaurant employee, and during slow hours or while waiting for customers, she would make funny faces towards the window, pulling up the corners of her mouth, opening her mouth wide, or puckering her lips. My head was full of questions. Living a boring life in the countryside, my curiosity piqued, and on the next payday, I decided to visit that restaurant I had been avoiding because it seemed a bit pricey. The inside of the restaurant wasn't as formal as I'd expected. It had a modern design and a touch of luxury, but the atmosphere was casual. I ordered a hamburger dinner set. For me, quantity matters more than taste in a regular meal. I was satisfied as long as my stomach was full. Even with that, the hamburger here stood out as exceptionally delicious. And the portion size was pretty generous. But $30 is a bit steep, a treat for myself on payday. I wasn't the only one who thought so. Seems like most folks decide to splurge on payday. The restaurant had a steady stream of customers. Thankfully, she looked so busy that she probably didn't have time to make any funny faces. Speaking of which, I noticed something as soon as I entered the restaurant. There was a large window that extended from the ceiling to about waist height of a standing person, and the lace curtains hanging there were tied back in the middle, leaving it open. At night, with the darkness outside and the reflection of the restaurant's lights on the window, it created a two-way mirror effect. This meant that the girl making funny faces was looking at a reflection in this two-way mirror. Maybe she was practicing for some kind of year-end party performance. That's what I thought at the time. Hey, everyone, can y'all take a moment and listen up? Manager Smith, with his usual laid-back voice, called out to us who were working. So, this coming Wednesday, Manager Smith pointed to a speaker on the wall that was playing a radio broadcast and mentioned that a radio show would be visiting our factory for a segment. You mean, like Hello Nebraska? Ding, ding, ding. Manager Smith mentioned that he would be interviewed, but some of us might be as well, so we should be prepared. Wednesday, which means the reporter would be Catherine, whom I'm a big fan of. And when I saw Catherine's face during the segment, I almost fainted. She was the same waitress making those funny faces. Suddenly, a piercing feedback noise echoed throughout the factory. Right after the Hello Nebraska crew arrived, someone had left the factory radio on, causing feedback. Manager Smith rushed to turn off the radio and profusely apologized to reporter Catherine and the crew. Next up, sir, over here. She turned the microphone to me. Your name? Bob. Roderick. Huh? Have you been working here long? With a pounding heart, I answered her questions. I couldn't remember what she asked or how I responded at the time. That night, I went back to my apartment and replayed the radio segment I had recorded earlier in the day. Well, thank you all, especially Mr. Smurf. That's all from us here. It was not a big deal for me to be called Roderick instead of Bob. But Mr. Smith ended up being called Mr. Smurf. The recording even included some post-interview studio chatter, where a male host said, calling Mr. Smith a Smurf was a bit rude, don't you think? Since then, I'd occasionally peek into the restaurant from a side street or my apartment window. And I realized something. Oh, she makes those faces at the two-way mirror when there aren't many customers, meaning it's a quiet time at the restaurant. Next time, I thought I'd try to time my visit for one of these quiet moments. Maybe then, I'd get a chance to chat with her for a bit. Before all this, I mostly just frequented the local convenience store. However, on my days off, I started doing bulk shopping at supermarkets and cut down on my impulse spending at convenience stores to save money. There's this restaurant that's a bit pricey, but she works there, and I wanted to visit. And then, the day before my next payday, I had decided to have dinner at that restaurant. Learning from my past experience, I decided to go the day before payday, not on the payday. Just to be sure, I checked the windows of the restaurant from the outside, which had turned into a one-way mirror. And I could see her making a funny face. When I entered the restaurant, just as I thought, I was the first customer of the night. Noticing a customer, she swiftly turned her body from the window to face inside. She guided me to a table for 4. I'm alone, is that okay? Yes, I don't think it will be that crowded tonight. I glanced over the menu, but I had already decided on the hamburger dinner set from the get-go. Returning the menu, I looked up at her, and she stared back at me intently. Excuse me, haven't we met somewhere before? Not at this restaurant. Yes, once at the auto repair shop you visited for a radio interview. Oh, you're that guy, she said, furrowing her brows, trying to recall. Was it Bob? Yes, Bob, right. Yes, it's Bob, not Roderick. She made a playful, billy face and stuck out her tongue. Realizing she had forgotten to take the order, she quickly headed towards the kitchen. New order, burger set, 1. After that, she whispered something to a dignified, older gentleman standing on the floor. The gentleman nodded in agreement, took a quick glance at me, and gave her another nod of approval. After she bowed to him, she returned to my table. I asked for permission to chat with you until your food is ready. Who's he? He's the owner. She then asked apologetically if she had mistakenly called me Roderick during the interview. I replied yes and jokingly mentioned that she called Mr. Smith Mr. Smurf. Hearing that, she laughed and shared how she got scolded in the studio for getting names wrong. Usually, I'm fine. I can say Bob correctly and even Manager Smith properly. But when I hold a microphone, I just mess up. She lamented, it's bad for a radio announcer. But I like listening to you, I said. She looked surprised, and I quickly tried to clarify. I mean, you have a unique style which makes the radio fun to listen to. Just then, a voice from the kitchen announced my hamburger was ready. She excused herself to get my meal. I sneakily glanced at the restaurant window. The one-way mirror was showing a clear reflection of me. When she brought the food, she said, "Sorry for the unnecessary chit-chat," and was about to leave my table when I stopped her. Just one more thing. She stopped and looked at me. Catherine, do you often make funny faces at that window? She looked genuinely shocked and covered her face with her hands. Could you see me? Yes, when it gets dark outside, that window becomes like a one-way mirror. From inside, it's like a regular mirror, but from outside, you can see everything inside the restaurant. She let out a big sigh, looking a little embarrassed. Then, as a demonstration, she made a funny face at me. I chuckled, saying, "Oh yeah, exactly that, exactly." It's like a pronunciation exercise. I wanted to improve my speech clarity. I do it in front of the window, looking at my reflection, whenever I have free time. She bowed her head towards me, saying she won't do it anymore. She added, "Please have it while it's still warm," as she began to move away from my table. Without thinking, I called out to her. It's perfectly fine. Having unique speech, it's like your own charm. I'm a fan, really, especially of your. She turned around, giving me a long, searching look. That night, I got carried away and talked endlessly with her, but afterwards, I felt embarrassed and decided not to visit that restaurant again. About a year after I arrived in Nebraska, shortly before I was set to return to New York. I decided to see her one last time at that restaurant. The place was almost empty that night. The gentlemanly owner seated me. Immediately after sitting, I looked around the restaurant, but she was nowhere to be seen. "It's been a while since your last visit. Thank you for coming back." I was surprised that he remembered me. For a moment, I wondered if he was mistaking me for someone else. "I felt terrible thinking our waitress might have bothered you with her long stories," he added. I quickly waved my hands in front of my face, denying it. Worried that he might have fired her because of a misunderstanding, I asked, "Is the waitress from that time off today?" He shook his head and said, "You know she works as a radio reporter, right?" I said yes, and mentioning that I still listened to her segment every Wednesday. Then, the owner told me about her. She couldn't make ends meet with just her weekly radio job, so she had been working part-time at this restaurant. However, about 3 months ago, she was scouted by a radio station in New York who found her intriguing. Now, she has quit her part-time job at this restaurant and moved to New York. In a radio station in New York, she appears in a late-night show as a comedian's assistant. She still appears in the program Good Morning Nebraska out of respect, as it was the show that nurtured her. I told her I'd be transferring to New York soon myself. So, this would be my last dinner at this place. Well, sorry for the long chat. Would you like the hamburger dinner set? The owner remembered my favorite dish. Even in Nebraska, you could listen to radio shows in New York. I quickly tuned into the late-night show where she was an assistant. "Catherine, you really need to work on your pronunciation." She was playfully teased on the show as well. "It's fine, really. There are a fan who likes me just the way I am." Who in the world would that be? A man named Roderick. He's not silly. He's a wonderful person. Oh, what's this? A love confession on air. Half a month later, I returned to New York. Not much had changed at my workplace, the repair factory, from a year ago. The only difference was that the young heir of the transportation company, who was the reason I was sent to Nebraska, had been reprimanded by his father and had calmed down. On the night before my first day off after returning to the New York factory, I spent some cash to buy a big bouquet and waited for her outside the radio station in Central Park after her late-night show. "Isn't that Bob? Why are you here?" She saw me and ran towards me, and I embraced her tightly. It was one of the few romances I had ever experienced. A story from a long time ago, over 30 years ago.